All right, let's do some advanced scouting of the Baltimore Orioles lineup. I'm going to pick 4, maybe 5 hitters here, dig through their approach, maybe where you can beat them from a pitcher's perspective. This should be fun. It's something I haven't done before, screen share style. So I'll be sharing my screen and showing you through TruMedia and a couple other outlets that I'll use to kind of dig into this advanced scouting. Let's get it going. All right, so off the top, just a couple basic notes. The Orioles are a pretty left-handed hitting heavy team. That's a tongue twister. So I'm going to look primarily at right-handed pitcher approach and only that. I just think it's for the simplification of this video to make more sense. The other thing I want to point out here is I'll be looking at trends slightly in individual players, but overall, I am going to assume in a lot of the heat maps that we're going to look at that the entire season is the most predictive thing as opposed to maybe what that player's done in the last, say, 2 to 3 months. And there's some fault in that, but I do think it's important to kind of point that out just because I think we're really going to get in the weeds with certain things. And I just kind of want to make it as simple as possible for the viewer here. So those are my 2 primary notes. Quick overview on the Orioles, top 10 offense, really good slugging team with more of an around average OBP. So from my perspective and thinking about that, you know, they probably swing more than the average team, etc. And as I mentioned before, a ton of pitches seen by left-handed hitters. And no clear, obvious left-handed, right-handed split differentials in terms of how they perform versus pitchers on the mound. But very left-handed hitting team. Generally by shape, too, you could see this all kind of lines up with them being top 10, right? Just splitting this up between high velo, which you'd call more of a gyro slider, a bullet slider, separating that from sweeper. Let's look at team performance on slug, xwOBA, run value. Lines up pretty clearly. Changeup, cutter, maybe a little bit below average relative to what they are producing against. But I like that they're slugging pretty well against high velo and they have third run value, even if xwOBA is saying that's not super predictive overall. But let's dig into hitters now. Gunnar Henderson, first off the top, this is the format you're going to see me run through here. I'm going to jump through generic player trends quickly. I'm going to look at pitch values, how that individual does versus specific pitches. We'll look at pretty generic maps, then we'll also look at what I think the approach is for that individual hitter. Trends for Gunnar Henderson. Started slow, peaked in June, uptrend since early August, which we can see on Fangraphs. I'm not going to go to Fangraphs for every player, but I think for Gunnar it's a good one to point out just to give you, looking at this trend point that I mentioned earlier. He did start slow. I remember that too, everyone getting kind of worried through a couple months. So you see kind of the wOBA sitting below what his season average is, around 350 until about mid-June, early June we'll say. Then he had a crazy peak. And then you could argue since July went onward, you see that uptrend right there into playing pretty solid wOBA around 400 in his last, let's say like 2 weeks, 3 weeks or so, which is important. The one thing I will point out with him though that's interesting is if you toggle on swing percentage, he's become a very aggressive hitter as the season has gone on. Pretty strong uptrend here consistently throughout the season. I don't know about from a game planning standpoint how much that really matters. He is becoming more aggressive of a hitter, especially because I think this is stabilized over about a little over a month. And his production, if you like correlate or just look at those 2 charts together, it is interesting that you see this delineation between started swinging more and production goes down, but then he started to kind of figure it out and he's crawled the wOBA back up overall. So you'll see that a lot. Like when guys swing more, they won't necessarily be as productive of hitters. So that just gets at the larger point of like taking pitches and how strong it is to have an understanding of the strike zone, and also just not swinging at pitches you're not going to be able to do damage on. So few hitters are positive, EV or expected value, whatever you want to call it, when they're swinging, which is, it gets into a whole nother angle. We could do a whole other video on that, but pretty basic here. Look at generic heat maps. This is not looking at individual pitch types. We're just looking at the full season versus right-handed pitchers. The league, how does the league pitch him, right? So I got my trends down there. Generic maps here. So we're thinking, okay, pitch generally away. So then the assumption is he probably creates slug inside, which he does, which we can see right here, just a quick toggle, right? So we saw the heavier concentration of where he's pitched versus where he actually creates damage. And let's just quickly see if there's any miss in the profile and where that is. And top of the zone, top away, not too much. Again, pretty solid to see. Blue there, below average miss rate relative to where he's slugging. That's kind of his happy zone. Looks like inside, down, in overall. Versus specific pitch types, you could see this overall. Really good kind of breaking ball hitter. So good curveball, good slider, good changeup, good cutter. This is just looking at Fangraphs season stats for an individual player and then scrolling down and looking at individual production. So yeah, pitch info, pitch values right here. There's a lot of ways to do this. But I just pulled the ones that I thought were above average, the ones that were more around average. So you see the four seam at average, the sinker well below average, I have that on bad. And then pretty good versus everything else. So good breaking ball hitter, not a great fastball hitter. So let's see where exactly you'd want to pitch him. I love these advanced reports in TruMedia. I had access to this portal recently. I've used this platform before. It's really cool. They do a ton of stuff. This is actually, I think there's 25 Major League Baseball teams that actually use this. And I believe the majority of them use this for exactly what I'm doing here, kind of basic advanced reporting and scouting of a player to see how exactly an opposing pitcher or team should approach that individual hitter. These reports are sick. Like, I love this. Just being able to quickly distill and see where a guy creates damage and where maybe he's susceptible to not being a particularly productive hitter, which we'll get into. But Gunnar Henderson here, sweet. Off the top, again, purely right-handed pitching. We're going to split this out by pitch type on the far left. Four-seam, sinker, cutter, slider, sweeper, we're going to delineate. Slider, more of a gyro ball. And sweeper is going to be whatever StatCast is classifying as a sweeper. The problem is they're not classifying every single sweeper as a sweeper, from what I've seen. So there will be some leak of, some of the sliders in here will be sweepers. But I do think on the whole, that distinction is important to point out. Four-seam fastball, Gunnar Henderson. Pitch frequency in this first column right here. Swing rate. Expected WOBA, which is just like, where do you create damage? I'm going to use expected WOBA as opposed to slug. And miss rate, where do you swing and miss? We'll leave swing and miss kind of off to the right for now. Just focus in and walk through Gunnar Henderson. So we see pitch values there. Then what's the approach here? Let's jump back and see what I wrote down. I did this exercise prior to actually doing this because I thought it would just go a little quicker. And I just wanted to point out certain things that I found interesting with some of these guys. So pitch frequency, four-seam pitched, middle up away. He swings more inside. You'll see a tendency with Gunnar Henderson here in this general swing column. Just looking four-seam, sink, cutter, slider. Look at off the plate here, right? Shadow of the zone, off the plate. Tendency to definitely swing inside, which lines up with where he was creating slug that we saw earlier. The thing with Gunnar against four seams, this is one of the reasons why we saw him as versus shapes here. Oh, excuse me, that's Orioles. Let's see. Pitch values. There we go. Average versus four seam. One of the reasons, and one of the most important things I think to point out from a really basic advanced scouting standpoint is just where are you swinging right here, this map, versus where you're actually creating damage. And you see, basically what I'm looking for is like, is there a portion of this swing where he's an aggressive swinger, but not exactly creating damage? So basically I want to overlap these two individual maps. And you can see that at the top of the zone here, like this whole blue column here, right? He has a tendency to swing at a pretty high rate, and yet he's not doing any damage from a contact quality standpoint. So it's pretty obvious that you can get four seam by him, and you can get them by him at the top of the zone. And the margin for error isn't drastic, right? Like we're gonna look at Adley Rutschman. He has a really sharp deviation where it's like blue to red. You see that lighter blue, the tealish color is more average production. So you have margin for error, especially at the top of the zone if you're missing down slightly. Say target up and then you pull down a little as a pitcher and you may be missing down. There's a little room. There's some room for leak where you're not going to get absolutely killed by Gunnar Henderson at the top of the zone. And then the thing I like more about approaching him with four-seam fastballs as well, right? I think it's important to think about natural misdirection for individual pitch types. So if you think four-seam at the top of the zone, if you have a classic like ride fastball with a little bit of run, arm side run, pitches generally miss in the direction of pitch movement. So if I'm targeting Gunnar Henderson at the top of the zone, right, and we're saying right around here, top of the zone, my natural miss is going to be up away from Gunnar Henderson based on the movement of my pitch. And that plays beautifully into where he swings and misses. So if you're throwing any kind of four-seam fastball, you need to put it at the top of the zone and you need to let it ride into your natural miss. The only time you're going to get beat is if you pull miss down here. I'd love something like a standard miss or the ability to look at where guys miss in certain directions and look at that on pitchers and see like, okay, if I have a pitcher who actually tends to pull miss more, then maybe against a guy like Gunnar Henderson, I'm more cautious about where that four-seam target is at the top of the zone. But this is pretty classic, like susceptible to up, and will miss up away. So there's margin for error here, especially when you're targeting him with four-seam up. So what's the approach? Four-seam up in, he's swinging there, not creating damage. His natural mix takes you to where he whiffs. That's a pretty good distillation of what I just said, right? I'll keep this running on the right here just to allow you to kind of follow along with what we're doing. Cool, four-seam approach seems pretty simple. Sinkers he's bad against, and we're looking at the same situation. He's pitched down away on sinkers. He swings in that same natural area of middle down in. He creates damage down in, but again, this area kind of second half, outer half of the zone doesn't create really any sinker damage. And I don't think Swift's too well relevant for sinkers. But again, this makes a lot of sense. So he's susceptible to two-seam fastballs and sink away, which may be a little counterintuitive because you think, okay, if I'm a four-seam fastball guy, or maybe I'm a two-fastball guy, I have four-seam and I have sinker or two-seam or whatever. Versus Gunnar Henderson, I want to use four-seam probably, right? Right to left, generally going to use something with more hop than sink, running into natural bat path. But there's something about how Gunnar Henderson swings, this year at least, that seems to not be conducive to even creating any kind of damage down away on sinkers. So although in the general sphere you don't want to throw oppo-handed sinkers, for example, I'd be comfortable doing that against Gunnar Henderson based on what we're looking at here. Because again, we're not looking at a lot of damage relative to where he's swinging. So we'll go with sinkers down away. So again, we're looking at the two approaches here. Like you could get him out with fastballs, I think, for the most part. Good hitter still. Like we're talking about one of the better hitters in baseball. I think he's like a 120 WRC plus guy. But even with that said, those hitters generally have room for error, right? I would actually be interested in taking a look at Quicken how much he's thrown fastballs against. How many fastballs does he see? 47% fastball. Yeah, I'm curious if that comes up in subsequent years as we get into a bigger sample of Gunnar Henderson, 22 years old. The other thing is, like, I imagine Gunnar Henderson will be able to counter this. It's just a matter of, like, when you're prepping, my theory here is to prep almost like in a playoff standpoint. I don't necessarily know if that tweak is made immediately. That calculus is one that's fascinating to me from a approach standpoint for an organization, is like, we see this guy's particularly great versus four-seam fastballs or sinkers. So we'll go with that approach. It's like, how much sample do you need before you're comfortable that he actually made an adjustment back? That's definitely something I'm overlooking here, and is a much more granular point of advanced scouting that I'm overlooking. But I want to try to keep this a little bit tighter and get through multiple guys. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your head, is like, if you see him starting to cover four-seam and sinker, that might be a reason to not throw as much four-seam sink as I'm proposing here from an approach standpoint. Okay, now let's look at 4 pitches he does well against: cutter, slider, sweeper, curveball. Okay, so cutter pitched in, swings in, damage in. You pretty much got to lay off that pitch overall, right? Especially if we think about our natural misdirection. If you're going cutter inside on Gunnar Henderson, your natural miss is going to be in the direction of that pitch movement, so probably to your glove side, so you're going to miss into him, and he creates damage in off the plate on that. So I say toggle down cutter usage right here on the left side. Yeah, that lines up with what I would do, right? You're not looking at too much margin for error room. Maybe you could backdoor, but like, how many pitchers in baseball are really comfortable backdooring their cutter to a left-handed hitter? And again, you're backdooring the cutter, your natural miss is over into the plate, right? So that means you're putting it back. Your damage, your miss potential is huge, especially if it cuts back into the middle of the zone. So toggle down cutter for sure. Slider, again, we're not talking a lot of sweep here. Pitch down, in, swings inside, consistent with everything he's done. Very similar to the cutter approach here. Again, damage down, in. Does he swing and miss? He does swing and miss down off the plate. This is a little tougher. I think maybe you could get away with a little bit of less sweep on sliders. But again, like, you got to go whiff. It's probably more two-strike, and it's probably down in here. But that's not really a strike pitch, right? So you talk about like pitching backwards, especially if you're a slider-heavy guy. I don't think you do that against Gunnar Henderson. I think you either just throttle fastball usage and bet that he's not going to be able to cover it based on what we see here, or maybe mix in slider late if you get ahead like 1-2-0-2. I could see that being an option, trying to get him swing and miss down here, especially if he's missing. There's probably a little bit of chase in his profile. The K rate's kind of more average, but yeah, talking about cutter usage, sweeper, same idea, right? Pitch down in, he's swinging down in. Doesn't create a ton of damage on them overall, but we're looking at a small sample here. So one of the things you'll notice in these plots is like, if you see dots, that means you're not looking at a large sample of something happening. As you go up to here, you'll see it's much more concentrated and you're actually getting a good view of maps. It's because you're getting overlay of multiple pitches for us to have more of a sample. It just doesn't seem like the league throws Gunnar a lot of sweepers right to left, which makes sense. That pitch generally isn't thrown to a lot of guys. So I don't necessarily know if there's enough sample there to consider what to do. I believe his slug against that particular kind of slider is pretty good. So maybe there is some reason to stay away from that. But he's a good low ball hitter, right? Like we see that slug down in, that makes a lot of sense that he would then cover and be good at pitches that are breaking down into his hands. So probably toggle-ish sweeper usage. So no sweeper damage in zone, yeah, but we're looking at small sample there. And slider damage in zone, yeah, that's obvious. And we can't really say that because I looked earlier and the slug is actually good against sweepers, so I'm gonna take that off. So no sweeper damage in zone, small sample. Yeah, like gyro slider damage. Let's go gyro slider margin for error small, right? Because again, we're thinking about the fact that he is slugging even a little in off the plate here. You see this expected woba on the slider. And the miss margin is small. Like, you got to get that down off the plate, which it's a tough task. Curveballs, he's good against. Down in swing rate. Again, same. He's covering down in. There's some miss below the zone there, but overall, he's hit well against them, so you probably want to shy away for the most part there. Change up, pitched away, swinging all over the place. Probably is looking for those arm side or glove side misses in, and creating some damage there too. Maybe there's some room for change up here. He hits them well. But again, miss rate here, margin relative to the expected woba, right? Like, there's some in-zone down miss. So if you get your changeup down, maybe there's room for that. And then velo plots are fun. Just taking a look at where he sees hard velo and how he does against them. And he does pretty well. Overall, again, velo top of zone we're looking at here. That's the same, pretty standard with the four-seam miss. And he's covering inside. So he's a decent velo hitter overall, which I think is good. But it's actually ironic because he's a decent velo hitter, but he just doesn't really touch four-seam fastballs at the top of the zone that well. So again, the approach for Gunnar is heavy fastball sink, I think, four-seam sink. Probably lay off and toggle down any other kind of usage coming in on his hands because he loves swinging in on his body, I think. So that's Gunnar Henderson. Adley Rutschman's a bit different of a hitter. So let's go Adley now. Let's look. Trends quick. I didn't think I saw anything drastic here. Yeah, nothing notable. Peak mid-July. He's evened out since. Just a really good hitter. This is a different hitter than Gunnar Henderson, which I think is important. Both left-handed hitters, they do subtle things differently, which I think is important. Let's look at... And the key thing you point out, just looking at basic strikeout rates with him, like Adley just doesn't swing and miss as much. Let me just pull on pitcher hand here and make sure we're looking at right-handed. Again, we're looking at purely right-handed, so just when Adley's a lefty. I just think that's going to be more valuable to think about because he's going to see the majority of his ABs from that side of the plate. Different kind of hitter. He's much more disciplined, right? So he covers the entirety of the zone a bit better. Gunnar Henderson was nailing everything down in on these kind of three areas right here and even over the middle. Adley is like average everywhere and mashing over the middle of the plate. So I would argue Adley's more of like your mistake hitter. Gunnar is more like his zone hitter where he's down in, he's looking down in and covering everything well, breaking into his hands. Adley's a bit different, right? So you see the inverse between Adley and Gunnar, where Adley's good versus four-seam sink, changeup split, and then he's more average versus slider, cutter, curve. So that's what we're going to get into, right? Pitch frequency is pitched away. Where does he create damage? Creates damage more up in. See, that's a difference from Gunnar Henderson. Gunnar Henderson's more down in here. Adley's looking more up middle, which again makes a little bit of sense in terms of just thinking through, okay, better versus four-seam and sink, so he's probably better up in the zone. Not as good versus things breaking in on his hand. He's probably worse down in the zone. And then miss rate here, there's probably not much. Yeah, he's really, this is different. We saw a lot of leak here for Gunnar up away, four-seam. It's not the same for Adley. It's just a different kind of hitter. Probably have to throw him more breaking balls, which gets to the point of like, yeah, that's probably why he has a higher walk rate and is more disciplined of a hitter. Good recognizing spin. Okay, four-seam approach here, right? Up away. Same idea as we're seeing with Gunnar Henderson. Adley's swing rate's different, though. You see, Gunnar was like swinging at everything in the zone, really looking for down-in misses. Adley loves the top of the zone here, which is interesting. Relative to where he's swinging, so again, I love this overlap. Swing rate versus expected woba. He covers up in the zone better than Gunnar Henderson for sure. There may be a little bit of margin here, though, right? Because he's swinging up at the top of the zone, even above the zone. But this red line right here before you get to the top of the zone is good. I just think the margin for error, I would say, on four-seam is much smaller with Adley. There might be some room, though. It's just not swing and miss, right? Like, you got to get way above the zone to get him to swing and miss. I don't necessarily think that's a viable option. You just have such a small margin for error, four-seam top of the zone. So if we're looking at, yeah, see, there we go, perfect. If you're throwing four-seam up, margin for error is small. Yeah, it's very small. To the point where you're probably not even going to really lean on that pitch that much because there's no swing and miss there. So you're basically looking for some kind of probably more pop-up infield fly ball weak contact, which is great. But it's just not the same as approaching Gunnar from a fastball standpoint. Gunnar had a blue gap here where, like, if you're missing even a little bit down into the zone, he wasn't doing a ton of damage versus that particular kind of four-seam. So just not as confident in getting that over the plate to Adley relative to Gunnar. Good against sinker as well. Pitch down, swinging kind of middle up. Sporadic damage here. So he's not seeing as much sinkers, which makes sense because you see some of these dots not concentrating into an ideal plot. Covering the zone relatively well. Not a ton of miss. Yeah, you probably just want to lay off sinkers generally, especially when you then get into cutters. Cutter sliders here as we think about more breaking balls. The ones he's average against, right? Cutter slider, sweeper curve. Cutter for him, up, middle, inside. He has that Gunnar Henderson, let me swing inside at him. And he does do a bit of damage, but he does that damage up on cutters, right? That's your probably concentration of damage. It's not the same as Gunnar. Gunnar hammer was everything down in. So again, it's interesting. You probably want cutter up into him, but it might be interesting to see if you have the command as a pitcher to take that and toggle it down in. Versus Adley, I think maybe your margin for error is better there. Reasonable amount of miss, sporadic, probably more average on cutters, so I wouldn't really think about that too much. But yeah, you probably want to get cutters inside to him and shy away from up. So we'll hesitate cutter up. I just don't, if he's covering fastball up, we saw that gap at the top of the zone. He's also able to cover cutter up there too. It just makes me a little more hesitant to approach him in that respect. And then slider, this is more, again, gyro slider, more bullet, less sweep. Pitch down, swinging down in. Does a good amount of damage there. And there's not a lot of swing and miss. So this is a good point that we delineated out sliders versus sweepers. Because Adley actually covers sliders relatively well, right? We're seeing frequency down, we're seeing down in, and then we're seeing a lot of coverage even below the zone there, which is interesting. Adjustability on Adley is really good. For him to be able to cover four seam up and not have a massive gap there at the top of the zone, in the zone at the top of the zone, and then also be able to cover slider down and not have a ton of swing and miss down off the plate. It's tough to approach him in that respect. The odd thing here, though, is that sweepers actually work really well versus Adley. I don't think he's seen a ton of them, but pulling off sweeper specifically, right? It's a similar swing map to where you're looking at with the non-sweeper slider here above. But with Adley, you get a lot of swing there and no damage. And again, we're not looking at a large sample here. This is, again, because we see these individual dots, these are small. It's probably like, we'll say 20 balls in play, 30 balls in play maybe, with very little damage against them. And the first time we're actually seeing some in-zone miss at a larger sample. That's why it's a little more concentrated red and not just an individual dot here on the map. So it's a bit counterintuitive. We're talking about how you don't want to throw sinkers to opposite-handed guys. Makes sense with Adley. He covers them well. In theory, you probably don't want to also throw sweepers to opposite-handed guys as a righty thrown to a lefty. But with Adley, there's no damage. He hasn't proven he can do damage on them in the zone. So let's gets into that point. The question I mentioned earlier is like, we see this in a small sample. How confident are we pushing this to a larger sample? And how confident are we in him potentially, and us getting beat off him making an adjustment, right? So I don't mind the idea of throwing him sweepers. I don't know if it's something about how he swing pass. So I struggle sweepers down in. Yep, strongly prefer sweep to gyro. Yeah, that's my approach versus him, right? There's not a lot of guys mixing both of those pitches. Again, we're not talking on the individual pitcher standpoint, more thinking broadly about, potentially late game matchups for a team facing the Orioles and how to pitch to Adley Rutschman. Is you may actually, if you don't want to pitch to your individual pitcher's strengths, which is another advanced scouting concept that I'm not talking about here, but I'm more looking at hitter weakness here as opposed to pitcher strength. But if your pitcher is throwing sweeper gyro, more cutter and then something off that, maybe you could actually play around with sweeper there, even though you as a pitcher might think that your cutter or a gyro ball is playing better right to left. Versus Adley in particular, there might be room for a sweeper. Curveball he's average against. Miss rate, some down in the zone, similar to Gunnar. Swinging in the zone, some damage there. Not much going on. Velo, he's pretty good against. I love that. Look at that. Inside, velo in. Even velo up there. It's again, just proving out he's really good versus four-seam. Change-up pitched away, swinging all over the zone. Maybe there's some room for change-up. It does say he's good versus change-up. I did see that. But you see swing rate there, and then you see outer third of the plate, not too much damage. And also not too much whiff, so you're probably looking more weak contact than changeups. Away from Adley Rutschman. But yeah, I mean there's room for changeup there. So maybe changeup room away. For most lefties, there's going to be changeup room down away, but just no whiff there. Put that, no whiffs there. Yeah, so you can get them out down in, unlike Gunnar. So again, two left-handed hitters that look similar on the same team that you want to pitch in different ways by looking at something like the maps we're looking at here. Cedric Mullins, another hitter. Now we're taking a step down. Mullins is a good hitter, but Mullins, I believe, in looking at trends, peaked earlier in the year. Yeah, he was pretty good to start the year, and it seems like maybe the league adjusted to him a bit. And he hasn't been as strong since. So just looking at a basic production map here. And let's see, or just general WOBA. Yeah, we'll look at game by game here. WOBA. Yeah, so again, strong, really strong. Playing at above average relative to season average. Until probably July. And then July 1, he's been more below. So you see the kind of two halves here. So it hasn't been as good of late, right? Been more, actually been rolling average has been pretty poor. So he hasn't been that good of a hitter of late. I wonder if the league is starting to figure out how to pick, project him and pitch to him. And then we go back to our swing plot here and we see, again, we're looking at another guy who's kind of become more aggressive on this team. Not as slowly, steadily increased as Gunnar Henderson, but similar idea. Jumping from 45% swing to 55% swing is going from a below average to above average. And it doesn't seem to be boding well for him, especially if you look at, again, looking at delineation of, well, maybe not as strong here. He actually aligned his peak, so he started swinging more and producing more. But he's maintained that swing percentage overall, and the production's kind of dropped off. So might be taking advantage of the fact that he's been pretty aggressive of late. Interesting to point out. Pitch values. Yeah, we're looking at more. There's more room here, right? Good versus four seam, good versus changeup split, average sinker curve, bad cutter slider. Looking at generic maps. Pitch frequency, where's he pitched? Kind of pitched middle of the plate. Again, we're looking at more aggressive, right? Worse hitter. Teams are probably more willing to kind of pitch in middle up, as opposed to an Adley or a Gunnar. Expected WOBA. Where's he create his damage? Not a ton. Yeah, he's creating damage kind of out over the plate and then a little down in. So again, we're looking at now a more pitchable hitter than like an Adley Rutschman or Gunnar Henderson. And he gets a lot of miss kind of up, away even. Yeah, marginally off the plate, down in two. We saw Adley's swing miss not really come until you get below that shadow of the zone there, which is important. But looking at maps here, taking a peek. Same idea, looking at righties, looking at our maps. He's not that great versus four seam, so let's see why. Cool. What's approach? Yeah, let's just jump through this quick. Four seam up. Swing rate, middle up. He swings a lot. Really only creates damage out away. So you see a nice gap on the inner third here against four seams. And then the miss is kind of out over the plate up. So room for four seam for sure. Yeah, maybe not a ton of room for four seam. I don't know. This is an interesting one. So it's funny because I was looking through the plot here and I saw, okay, pitch inside. If you're pitching him inside with four seam, I think there's some room. But he's good versus four seam overall. So this gets back to a point I mentioned earlier, is like, where's your natural miss as a pitcher? So if you're pitching four seam in to him, into Cedric Mullins, your miss, again, arm side miss, arm side up miss. If you're trying to go, say, inside on this expected WOBA chart here, and you miss, your misdirection is going to be this way, this direction, which is into where he covers. He covers that over the plate really well. That was contrasting with Gunnar Henderson, where you wanted to pitch him inside, but then you had margin for error up away, taking the pitch. His whiff was in your natural miss. The problem here is that you have a little of that miss, but you have a lot more damage. That's pretty much one of the only spots he creates damage against four seams. Just out over the plate, covering that pitch really well. So yeah, covers four seam well. There's high variance up away. I think you can do it, but again, thinking logically about, okay, what if we want to throw four seam versus Cedric Mullins, what pitchers on our staff don't miss arm side as much on their four seam? I'd probably prefer the guys that are able to dot that pitch more. Whereas versus Gunnar, I don't think I care about that as much, because again, that natural miss is taking you into his pattern of miss. Bad versus cutter. And this is like one of the more obvious, like, use this pitch. Oh, we skipped over sinker, but let me talk cutter quick. Cutter pitched in, really swinging inside on these. That's crazy. And there's no damage here at all on the inner third of the plate. He's getting killed by cutters in. A little bit up in here, but that's probably a small sample. Maybe getting one ball or another. But this is something, if you're Cedric Mullins, you're probably thinking about this, and I'm like, why? I got to stop swinging cutter in, because I'm not doing any damage on those pitches in. That's just the distinction probably between a good hitter and more of an average hitter. Mullins is good, but he's not great. And he gets killed by cutter in. So a lot of room for cover even on the plate. Yeah, we're going to star that. That's definitely the approach here. Sinker, we skipped over. Away. He was more average versus sinker. Pitched away, swinging away, doing damage away. A little bit of swing and miss all over the zone, though. Again, oppo-handed sinker's not that great. Probably lay off that. Sinkers have to be off plate. I probably didn't even think about sinker too much against him. I'll take that off. Cutter, we just talked about. Go slider sweeper on him. He's bad versus sliders generally, and we see that borne out. Pitch down in. These are non-sweep sliders, swinging all over the place. Yeah, so this is one where the distinction, between expected WOBA that down in versus where he swings and misses is really tight. So you do have to get the pitch down in, as you're always going to want to get probably a slider down in, and he's going to cover kind of down inside. I'd be curious about using more away-ish, like using this portion of the zone, because it's not like all the way outer third, it's more outer half. I'd wonder whether kind of just pitching down with not a lot of sweep is a good approach against him, because you see that a little with curveball too, right? Curveball here, expected WOBA is good away, but the second you get down in the zone here, he creates a lot of swing and miss. And it's the same thing here, where like I'd want breaking balls, I just want him to be generally down. He doesn't chase a ton, but yeah, slider sweeper down in off play, generally down. I'm going to emphasize the generally down is probably the more important approach here. Down on curve, slider sweeper. A lot of room for cutter, slider sweeper down in. Yeah, as with any left-handed hitter, off plate, generally down too. We'll take out generally down. Yeah, generally down on any breaking ball is probably approach here, which I like overall. Versus velo, let's see quick. Yeah, not great velo in. That's another point. Hard cutters in are probably just a lovely combination for him not to be able to do any damage. That's definitely your target, is kind of go inside. And again, thinking about the differential between four seam and cutter there, right? If you're thinking about missing into the natural pattern of your miss, four seam you're missing up away, because you're on a cutter or even a cut right fastball, there isn't as much of that movement. I would imagine the tendency for most pitchers who throw more of a cut right four seam or just a pure cutter is that you're not missing as much to your arm side, right? So the margin for error going inside on him, especially if you have cut right four seam, which would be harder than your standard cutter, is probably the perfect approach against him. Yeah, lots of swings and cutters are using creating damage. That is probably better to be suited up here, which we were talking about. Yeah, again, slider miss down in, but he's covering down in. We know that. We just want to keep it generally down against him, against Cedric Mullins. Okay, Santander. I'm not sure if I saw any trends here. Becoming more patient hitter as season progressed. Interesting. So let me take a look at that quick. Just going back to our rolling maps on Fangraphs here again. Graphs. Let's take a look. Let's go game by game. We'll just do 15 game average. Becoming more patient hitters implying swing is down probably. Yeah, there we go. So a little contrast here. This is gonna not work. Here, boom, boom. Cool. Trend line down. Again, we're looking at small margin here. This isn't even as much as we saw with Adley becoming more patient, and I believe Gunnar becoming more aggressive. Rolling swing hanging around 52. Now it's kind of hanging around 50. He had a bit of a throw down here, and then he's come back up. So yeah, you could say he's become marginally more patient. Become marginally more patient as a hitter. Pitch values, good, great versus four seam, bad versus cutter sink, average versus slider curve change. So again, yeah, different contrasting hitter. 4 left-handed hitters. We've talked through all of them, a bit contrasting. We'll go Santander. Look at general quick. Let's just go frequency. Let me toggle see switch. Again, purely looking at right-handed pitchers against him, so let's just make sure we correct that quick. On TruMedia, pitched up, down. Not much inside. Okay, a little more sporadic in terms of how he's pitched. Again, not as strong of a hitter as Gunnar and Adley. Still pretty good hitter overall, I would say. Slug, covering down in nice, covering up, so good adjustability overall, I would say. And where does he miss? Not much miss. That's good. It's a good hitter. Yeah, he's pretty disciplined. He's covering down a little better. This is, again, we want to contrast. We were contrasting Gunnar and Adley, right? Gunnar, not as good up. Adley, really good at covering everything up. There's some room down in to get Adley out. Mullins and Santander are, again, slightly different hitters. Not surprising. One's more power, one's more speed contact. But thinking about generally, like Santander is pitched up, down. Even though he covers up well. Slug, we'll say like diverse slug. And diverse slug covers down well, which is the contrasting to Mullins overall. And what's the approach here? Let's take a peek at the maps. For Santander, four seam heavy up in the zone, really pounding him up. But he does a decent job of covering that. So it's interesting. You know, I'm not sure how much he's pitched, how many four seams does he actually see relative to the league average? I think the league average four seam is somewhere around like 36-ish%. I'm obviously going to depend on hitter. He sees 46, so it's progressively dropped too. So the league is slowly understanding. That's actually a pretty big drop year over year. 49% on the 46. Again, 3 percentage points is small, but in a hitter, that does make an impact. And the league is kind of realizing that he probably covers four seam up well. Pitched up, swings up, creates damage up, creates damage kind of sporadically throughout the zone. There's a little bit of swing and miss there, but it's more average swing and miss. So yeah, what's the approach? He is pitched up with four seam, covers it really well. So yeah, there's probably not much room for four seam here, which is interesting. Again, probably the only hitter here I'm trying to think that we weren't thinking four seam up against. Adley, that we were thinking that wasn't the smartest idea either. But so Adley's a little maybe more like Santander here in this respect. Not as good versus sinkers. Swings a lot middle of the plate. Not much damage middle of the plate is interesting. I wonder if that's a swing path thing. So you could maybe cheat sinkers. Cheat sinkers middle is an interesting idea. Oppo handed sinkers middle of the plate. There's probably not a lot of organizations that are going to be convinced that that's the approach against Santander. But looking at maps and small sample, there is room for that a bit. He covers them down really well, which we're going to see, I think, in some of the other pitches that we're going to take a look at. Cutters. He's bad versus cutters. This is probably your room. Again, swinging up, or pitched kind of way inside here. Swings well inside. A lot of lefties tend to swing on that hard inner third of the plate. Things breaking into him. That's probably a bit of contrast here. Cutters down. Cutters down is interesting here, right? The ability to not kind of cover that pitch is fascinating for a guy. This is more of an Adley kind of hitter as opposed to a Mullins, right? Ability to cover down, maybe the ability to cover down into. Sliders as well. Sliders pitch down in, swinging down, covering in the plate, covering below the zone. Yeah, it's tough, right? Because you're not looking at strong miss. Like this tealy blue is average swing miss, right? Which is, I guess that's fine. I don't necessarily know if you want to target that though, however. Again, non-sweep sliders here. I'm just more worried that slider miss, we're thinking of average fastball miss. Slider miss is generally going to be down or to the glove side. So I guess I don't mind it as like if you're pulling the pitch to the inner third of the plate, you'll get some swing and miss and not a lot of damage. But if you're just missing purely down, he seems to be able to kind of have some juice there. And similarly with sweepers, just doesn't see a lot of them. Not a lot of swing and miss on sweepers, which is interesting. So maybe shy away from that overall. Cheat sinkers middle. Not much damage on the sinkers over the plate. A lot of in-zone cutter swing without much damage, especially over the plate. Yeah, did I point that out? Let me see. Go back to cutter swing. I'd say more down. Without much damage down on cutter. And then slider, we were talking about sweeper. Curveball, I'm expecting some damage down. Yeah. Sweeper down. I'd just be worried about pitching him down. So you got to pitch him in as opposed to down. Which is contrasting with Mullins, who we're pretty confident you could probably get him out at the bottom of the zone. Pitch in as opposed to down there. And then curveball, then velo, quick. Middle of the plate, up, down. Swings inside, creates damage, good on velo. A little bit of swing miss. Not a lot up in the zone, though, which is encouraging. He's a good velo hitter, which is tough, especially in bullpen games late. I don't know if I want to jump around on Hearn quick, but he peaked early, trending up as of late. Average versus everything best. Yeah, it's interesting. He's more of like a pure average hitter. I think, we won't look at maps on him. The one thing I will point out, and I'll do this quick. Let's pull this open. The only thing I want to point out is he came from the Royals, and I don't necessarily know if we've talked about like why he's gotten so much better. I imagine someone's written a piece on this, and apologies for not mentioning this, but I just want to point out one thing that like 2023, right? We're looking at. I just want to point out one thing. Four seam, like we'll just talk four seam, right? We saw he was good against four seam. I think. Let's just pull back to our chart here. So I saw that they turned the Orioles turned him around versus four seam, which is pretty interesting. So if we look at his 2023 advanced report, and then I duplicated this, I want to look at 2022. All I want to point out is four seam middle of the plate. Four seam middle of the plate versus Ryan O'Hearn crushing the ball this year, right? Which is standard. If you're a left-handed hitter, you're going to see a lot of four seam fastballs, and you have to be able to do damage on fastballs middle of the plate. He's doing them against sinkers too. And he's doing them against sliders too. Like he's a middle of the plate guy. He's a mistake hitter over the middle of the plate. There's a lot of swing miss down in. There's some cutter up away. You can maybe get him out. Some four seam way up, but again, covering damage there really well. Jump back to 2022 with the Royals. And this is where the contrast is. I'm not exactly sure what the Orioles did from a hitting standpoint with Hearn in terms of pure adjustments to how he moves or his swing or whatever. But it's really funny to me that, if this wants to load here, what I think we're going to see is less damage over the middle of the plate. So we think about all the time of like hitters getting better. How did they get better? They must have done something drastic to him. With O'Hearn, I think my takeaway in looking at him quickly, they just got him to hit balls over the middle of the plate better, which I think maybe points out that there was perhaps something fundamentally wrong with how he just swung naturally over the middle of the plate, right? Like if you're a left-handed hitter swinging at forward, where's his swing? He still swings up too. They didn't even fix the chase on swing up. Like there's still room for him. Like, he's swinging well above the zone on four seam. He just was now able to cover them better. So this, again, focus on this expected WOBA versus four seam. Middle of the plate, crushing the ball. Middle of the plate, fine, but not the amount of damage that we're seeing from him where he's like a league average hitter or better, So my theory here is they just corrected something mechanically in his swing to get him firing over the middle of the plate more efficiently and with more damage. And that's it. They didn't really do anything else drastically different, right? They didn't even adjust any of the swing above the zone. Right, there's still room to get him out well above the zone, I think. Cutter's just crazy swing right there, covering the middle of the plate good. Again, not a lot of damage on slider. Oh, there actually is damage on sliders. So he's covering sliders. Was that something he was able to do previously? Yeah, he always had a nice spot on sliders. Decent there. A lot of miss kind of adjusting that. But yeah, it seems crazy to me that they were able to adjust him and just make him a better hitter versus sliders, fastballs versus middle of the plate. But that's my takeaway on Ryan O'Hearn. I won't really dig into the advance report there. I just don't think it's as relevant. But hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to do a few more of these on different teams. The Orioles is just one that jumped out. Again, ton of left-handed hitters. They take a ton of ABs from left-handed hitters. Their best hitters are all lefties. And just want to dig through it and kind of poke through. Hope this was fun. If you have any thoughts or saw anything along the way you found interesting, or you've done your own kind of looking at these hitters and thought you had something that contrasted with what I say, please let me know in the comments. Always fascinating perspective. Couple more of these coming, probably Braves, Dodgers are the next two. So let me know what you think of this format. Slightly different, same screen share, just looking more of an advanced standpoint. And shout out again to TruMedia for giving me access to the portal. So hope you enjoy this. Take care.